The bride grabbed my wrist so hard her nails left small crescent marks in my skin, pulled me into the flower-filled coat closet behind the chapel, and with 12 minutes left before she was supposed to walk down the aisle, she pressed her forehead against mine and whispered words I will never forget as long as I live. Please, help me stop this. Before we go any further into what happened in that closet, and everything that came after it, I want to ask you something. If you believe in kindness, if you believe people deserve forgiveness even when they have made terrible mistakes, if you believe that hope can survive even in the ugliest moments of our lives, and if you believe that every single person deserves a second chance to choose a different path, then I would be so grateful if you pressed the like button right now, left a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from, shared this with someone who might need a little hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another one of these stories. Our community here means more to me than you know, and every single one of you who takes 30 seconds to do that helps keep our family of storytellers growing. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, to a small church at the edge of a quiet town, on a warm Saturday morning in early June, when none of us yet understood what was about to unfold. My name is Grace Whitfield, and I had known the bride, a woman named Amelia Foster, since we were both 7 years old, sitting cross-legged on a scratchy classroom rug learning our multiplication tables. We grew up 2 houses apart on Larkspur Lane, rode the same yellow bus for 11 years, shared a locker in 9th grade because the school ran out, and cried into the same pillow the night her father left. Amelia was the kind of friend who remembered your coffee order without being told, who showed up at your door with soup when you were sick even if you hadn't asked, who could make you laugh so hard in the middle of a funeral that you had to bite the inside of your cheek to stay respectful. She was, in every sense that mattered, my sister, even though we did not share a drop of the same blood. When Amelia called me 8 months before the wedding, her voice trembling with excitement, to tell me that a man named Julian Marsh had proposed to her on the pier where they'd had their first date, I screamed so loudly into the phone that my neighbor knocked on my wall. I had met Julian only a handful of times before that, mostly at group dinners where he seemed pleasant enough, charming even, the kind of man who complimented the restaurant's wine list and remembered to ask the waiter's name. He worked in commercial real estate, drove a car that cost more than my annual salary, and had a smile that made you feel, for just a moment, like you were the only person in the room. Amelia had been dating him for a little over a year by then, and she told me, breathless and giddy, that he made her feel safe in a way no one else ever had. I wanted to believe her. I wanted, more than anything, for my oldest friend to have found the kind of love that made her glow the way she glowed when she talked about him. But there is a particular kind of unease that settles into your stomach when something is wrong long before your mind is willing to admit it, and looking back now, I realize that unease had been sitting in me for months, quiet and patient, waiting for its moment to speak. I noticed it the first time Amelia canceled our weekly coffee because Julian had made plans for the two of them without asking her first, and she laughed it off as him being spontaneous. I noticed it again when she stopped posting the loud, silly videos she used to make of herself dancing in her kitchen, the ones that used to fill up my phone with joy, and started posting instead careful, posed photographs where she always stood slightly behind him, her smile a little too practiced. I noticed it when she showed up to my birthday dinner wearing long sleeves in the middle of July, and when I asked if she was cold, she said something about a new skincare routine that made her sensitive to the sun, and changed the subject so quickly I almost believed I had imagined the whole exchange. Almost. The months before the wedding blurred together in a haze of dress fittings and seating charts and the particular exhaustion that comes from helping plan an event you have quietly begun to fear. Amelia's mother, a warm, weathered woman named Carol Foster who had raised Amelia mostly on her own after her husband left, threw herself into the wedding planning with the kind of desperate joy that comes from wanting so badly for your child's life to be easier than your own had been. Carol had worked 2 jobs for most of Amelia's childhood, waiting tables at a diner during the day and cleaning offices at night, and she used to tell Amelia, half joking and half not, that she just wanted her daughter to marry someone who would never make her count coins for gas money. When Julian came along with his tailored suits and his effortless confidence, Carol practically wept with relief, believing that her daughter's life was finally about to become easy in the way hers never had been. I tried, twice, to ask Amelia directly if everything was okay. The first time was over lunch at the little Italian place we had gone to since college, the one with the checkered tablecloths and the owner who still remembered our names. I asked her, as gently as I knew how, if Julian was good to her, and she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something that flickered between fear and pleading, and said of course he was. Why would I even ask that? I let it go, because she asked me to, and because I told myself that maybe I was simply overprotective, that maybe the unease living in my stomach was just the ordinary anxiety of watching your best friend build a life that no longer had you at its center. The second time I asked was 3 weeks before the wedding, at her bachelorette dinner, when I found her crying alone in the restaurant bathroom, mascara streaked down her cheeks, and she told me, through gasping breaths, that she was just overwhelmed with wedding stress, that brides cry, that this was normal. I believed her because I wanted to, and because believing the alternative felt too heavy to carry into a dinner full of laughing bridesmaids waiting just outside the door. What I did not know then, what I would only learn in fragments over the following weeks, was that Julian Marsh had spent the better part of a year quietly, methodically, dismantling the woman I loved like a sister. It had not started with anything dramatic. It never does. It started with small comments about her friends, gentle enough to seem like concern, suggesting that maybe I was a bad influence, that maybe her college roommate was jealous of her happiness, that maybe her mother's involvement in the wedding planning was a sign that Carol couldn't let go. It started with him showing up unannounced at her apartment to check on her, framing it as romantic devotion rather than surveillance. It started with him controlling small things, what she wore, who she spoke to, how late she stayed out, always wrapped in the language of love and protection, until one day Amelia looked up and realized that her entire world had shrunk down to the size of whatever room Julian happened to be standing in. The bruises, when they started, were always in places easy to hide. A grip too tight on her upper arm during an argument in the car. A shove into a doorframe that left a mark low on her hip, hidden beneath her clothes. He always apologized afterward, always cried, always told her that he only acted that way because he loved her so much, because the thought of losing her frightened him more than anything else in the world, and Amelia, who had grown up watching her mother struggle alone and had absorbed a quiet terror of ending up unloved and unsupported, told herself that this was simply what love sometimes cost. She told herself that every relationship had hard seasons. She told herself that Julian's temper was a wound from his own difficult childhood, one he had shared with her in tearful late-night conversations, and that if she loved him hard enough and patiently enough, she could heal whatever had broken in him long before she ever met him. This is one of the cruelest tricks that fear and love can play on a person, convincing them that their own suffering is a kind of noble sacrifice, that staying is bravery rather than danger. By the morning of the wedding, Amelia had not spoken a single honest word about any of this to another living soul. She had perfected the art of smiling through it, of laughing at Julian's jokes at dinner parties even when her hands trembled in her lap, of telling her mother that everything was wonderful because she could not bear to see the relief drain from Carol's tired, hopeful face. She told herself that once they were married, once the wedding stress was behind them, things would go back to how they had been in the beginning, back when Julian used to leave little notes in her coat pockets and surprise her with her favorite flowers for no reason at all. She told herself this the way a person tells themselves anything they desperately need to be true. I arrived at the small stone chapel at 9 in the morning, 3 hours before the ceremony, carrying 2 garment bags, a box of bobby pins, and the particular nervous energy that comes from being the maid of honor at your best friend's wedding. The morning was bright and clear, the kind of June morning that smells like cut grass and lilac, sunlight pouring gold through the chapel's narrow windows and scattering across the wooden pews. Amelia's mother had strung fairy lights through the rafters the night before, and they glimmered faintly even in the daylight, waiting for evening, though of course this wedding, like every important moment in this story, would happen entirely in the bright honesty of day. The bridal suite, a small converted room just off the chapel's side entrance, was already crowded by the time I arrived, filled with the low hum of hairspray and laughter and someone's playlist of upbeat pop songs drifting from a phone propped against a mirror. Carol was fussing over the veil, adjusting it a fraction of an inch at a time with the intense concentration of a woman determined to get every detail right for her only daughter. The other bridesmaids, 3 women Amelia had met at various points in her adult life, were sipping mimosas from plastic flutes and taking photographs for social media. And in the center of it all sat Amelia, in her wedding dress, looking, to anyone who did not know her the way I knew her, absolutely radiant. But I knew her. I had known her for over 2 decades, had memorized the particular way her smile changed when it was real versus when it was performed, had learned the subtle tightness that crept into her shoulders when something was wrong long before she ever said a word about it. And when I looked at her that morning, sitting perfectly still while a stranger pinned tiny white flowers into her hair, I saw something in her eyes that I can only describe as drowning. She was smiling at everyone in the room. She was answering their compliments with practiced grace. And underneath all of it, her eyes kept flicking toward the door, toward the hallway, toward the exit, like a woman calculating the distance to safety. At 11:48, 12 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Amelia stood up abruptly from her chair, mumbled something about needing air, and walked quickly out of the bridal suite before anyone could stop her. I followed, some instinct older than conscious thought pulling me after her, and I found her not outside in the June sunshine as I expected, but tucked into the small coat closet just off the chapel's back hallway, surrounded by folded blankets and spare chairs, her wedding dress bunched awkwardly around her as she pressed herself into the corner like she was trying to disappear into the wall itself. I stepped inside and pulled the door mostly closed behind me, and that was when she reached out and grabbed my wrist, her grip shaking, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts, and whispered the words that would change the course of that entire day, and in many ways, the entire rest of her life. "Please," she said, "help me stop this." I asked her what she meant, though some part of me already understood, and she began speaking so quickly that her words tumbled over each other, telling me things I had feared but never let myself fully imagine, about grips that left marks, about apologies that always came with tears, about a fear that had grown so large inside her that she had started rehearsing, in the privacy of her own mind, exactly how she would explain away each new bruise before anyone could ask. She told me that 3 nights earlier, during the rehearsal dinner, Julian had gripped her arm so hard in the parking lot, furious that she had laughed too long at a joke his best man made, that she had to wear a cardigan the next day despite the summer heat to hide the finger-shaped bruises blooming purple against her skin. She told me she had lain awake every night that week staring at the ceiling, trying to convince herself that this was simply what marriage required, that every long-term relationship had its difficult chapters, that her mother had endured far worse in silence and survived. She told me that she loved parts of Julian still, the parts from the beginning, the parts she kept hoping would return if she just tried hard enough, and that this was somehow the most confusing and shameful part of all, loving someone and being terrified of them at the very same time. I want to pause here and tell you something important, something I have carried with me since that morning in the coat closet. When someone finally finds the courage to whisper the truth they have been hiding, the very worst thing you can do is make them feel foolish for having hidden it in the first place, or foolish for having loved someone who hurt them. Shame cannot be met with more shame. It can only be met with steadiness. So I did not gasp, and I did not cry, though every part of me wanted to. I knelt down in that cramped little closet, careful of the delicate fabric of her dress, took both of her trembling hands in mine, and I told her, as calmly as I could manage, that she did not have to walk down that aisle in 12 minutes, or ever, and that whatever she decided, I was not going anywhere. The problem, of course, was that we had 11 minutes left, a chapel full of nearly 200 guests, a mother who had spent every spare dollar of 2 years' worth of savings on this exact day, and a groom who was, at that very moment, standing at the altar practicing his vows in his head, entirely unaware that the woman he had spent a year quietly breaking down was about to make the bravest decision of her life. I asked Amelia what she wanted, not what she thought she should want, not what would be easiest to explain to the guests, but what she actually wanted, right there, in that moment, and for the first time in longer than either of us could say, I watched her ask herself the same question honestly. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders, which had been climbing toward her ears for months, dropped an inch. And she said, in a voice so quiet I had to lean in to hear it, that she did not want to marry him. That she was terrified of what her life would look like in 5 years if she did. That she thought maybe she had known this for months but had been too afraid, and too ashamed, and too worried about disappointing her mother, to let herself hear it. We had 9 minutes left. I asked her if she trusted me, and she nodded, and I told her that I was going to go get her mother, and that whatever happened next, we were going to face it together, all three of us, because this was not a decision she needed to make alone in a closet with her wedding dress crushed against damp stacked blankets. I found Carol in the bridal suite, still fretting over a loose hairpin, and I asked her to step outside with me for just a moment, keeping my voice light enough not to alarm the other bridesmaids. The moment we were alone in the hallway, I told her, as gently and as quickly as I could, what Amelia had just told me. I watched Carol's face move through an entire lifetime of emotion in the span of about 4 seconds, shock, then disbelief, then a terrible, dawning recognition, the recognition of a woman who had spent years training herself not to see certain things because seeing them would have been unbearable. And then, before I could say another word, Carol was already moving toward the closet, her wedding day heels clicking urgently against the old wooden floor, because whatever else was true about Carol Foster, whatever mistakes she had or had not made, she loved her daughter with a ferocity that no amount of fear or embarrassment could override once it was finally given permission to act. Inside the closet, Carol dropped to her knees in front of her daughter, ruining the careful pressing of her mother of the bride dress without a second thought, and gathered Amelia's face in both hands. She told her, with tears already sliding down her cheeks, that she did not care about the money spent, or the guests waiting, or what anyone in that chapel would think, that the only thing in this entire world she had ever wanted was for her daughter to be safe and happy, and that if this wedding was going to take either of those things away from her, then this wedding was not going to happen. I stood in the doorway of that closet and watched 2 decades of unspoken fear finally break open into the light, watched a mother and daughter hold each other and cry the kind of tears that scrub something clean rather than wound it further, and I understood, watching them, that whatever happened in the next few minutes, something important had already healed in that small, crowded closet full of folded blankets. We had 6 minutes left, and a chapel full of people who did not yet know that anything was wrong. Carol, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, straightened her shoulders and said that she would handle the guests, that this was, in the end, still her job as the mother of the bride, to protect her daughter from anything that threatened her, including 200 confused wedding guests and an expensive reception already underway in the adjoining hall. I offered to go with her, but she shook her head and told me, with a fierce, wet-eyed smile, that my job right now was to stay with Amelia, and that she would send someone to fetch the officiant quietly before anyone had the chance to make a scene. She left the closet with the same determined stride she must have used 1,000 times walking into diners for double shifts and cleaning jobs at midnight, a woman who had spent her whole life doing hard things quietly so that her daughter would not have to. What happened next, I did not witness firsthand, but I have pieced it together since from the accounts of people who were there. Carol walked calmly to the front of the chapel, where the officiant, a soft-spoken older man named Reverend Holt who had known Amelia since she was a baby, was waiting near the altar. She spoke to him quietly for a moment, and I am told his expression shifted from confusion to concern to something like quiet resolve, the look of a man who had officiated enough weddings and funerals in his long life to understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do at an altar is stop a ceremony rather than complete it. He nodded, and Carol turned to face the gathered guests, her voice steady even though her hands, I later learned, would not stop shaking for the rest of that day. She told the room, simply and with a dignity that people still talk about years later, that the wedding would not be taking place, that her daughter needed their support rather than their questions right now, and that everyone was warmly invited to stay and enjoy the meal that had already been prepared, because there was no reason good food should go to waste, but that today, in this particular chapel, there would not be a wedding. There was a ripple of stunned murmurs, of course, and a scattering of gasps, and somewhere near the back a folding chair scraped loudly against the floor as someone stood too quickly, but there was also, remarkably, a wave of applause, quiet at first and then growing, started by an elderly aunt who had apparently disliked Julian from the very first family dinner she'd attended with him, and joined, one, by relatives and friends who had perhaps sensed, in ways they could not quite articulate, that something had felt wrong about this match for a long time. Julian, standing at the altar in his rented tuxedo, did not take the news gracefully. I am told his face went through its own transformation, confusion collapsing into fury within seconds, and that he demanded to know where Amelia was, that he tried to push past the officiant toward the side hallway where we were hidden, and that it was, of all people, Amelia's Uncle Robert, a quiet man who rarely said much at family gatherings, who stepped calmly into his path and told him, in a voice that apparently left no room for argument, that it was time for him to leave. Whatever mask Julian had worn so carefully for the past year, the charming smile, the effortless confidence, the wine-list compliments, slipped entirely in that moment, and several guests later said they finally understood, watching his face twist with rage in front of 200 witnesses, exactly what Amelia had been living with behind closed doors. Back in the closet, I held Amelia while she cried, not the careful, camera-ready tears of a bride overwhelmed by joy, but the deep, shuddering sobs of someone releasing a year's worth of swallowed fear all at once. I did not tell her it would be okay, because I did not yet know if it would be, and false comfort has never sat right with me. Instead I simply stayed, my arms around her, her wedding dress pooling around us both on the closet floor, and I let her cry for as long as she needed to, occasionally reminding her to breathe, occasionally reminding her that she was safe, that this feeling, whatever it was, would not last forever even though it felt endless in the moment. When Carol returned to the closet, her makeup ruined, her hands still trembling, she knelt down beside us both and told Amelia that it was done, that Julian was gone, that the guests knew, and that nobody, not one single person in that entire chapel, blamed her for a single thing. Amelia asked, in a small, frightened voice, if her mother was disappointed, if all that money and all that planning had been wasted for nothing, and Carol said something I have never forgotten, something I think about often even now, years later. She said that she had spent her entire life scraping together every spare dollar so that her daughter would never have to feel trapped the way she herself had sometimes felt trapped, and that if all that saved money had gone toward the exact opposite of being trapped, toward her daughter walking free instead of walking down an aisle toward a life of fear, then it was, without question, the best money she had ever spent in her life. We stayed in that little chapel for another hour after the guests had mostly filtered out or moved into the reception hall to eat the meal that had, indeed, already been prepared and was not going to waste. Amelia eventually changed out of her wedding dress into a pair of jeans and an old college sweatshirt that someone found in a car trunk, and she walked, barefoot, out into the June sunshine behind the chapel, where a small garden of roses was blooming along a stone wall. She sat on that wall for a long time, watching the light move through the leaves, and I sat beside her, and neither of us said very much, because sometimes the most important moments in a friendship do not require words at all. I wish I could tell you that everything after that day was simple, that Amelia's fear evaporated the moment she stepped away from that altar, but healing does not work that cleanly, and I would be lying to you if I painted it that way. The weeks that followed were hard. Amelia moved back in with her mother for a while, unable to stay in the apartment she had shared with Julian, unable even to walk past certain restaurants they used to visit together without her chest tightening with old fear. She started seeing a counselor, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Reyes who specialized in exactly this kind of harm, and she learned, slowly, painfully, the language for things she had spent a year unable to name even to herself. There were nights she called me at 2 a.m, unable to sleep, replaying moments from the relationship and questioning whether she had somehow imagined the worst of it, and I would stay on the phone with her until the panic passed, reminding her gently that her fear had been real, that the marks on her skin had been real, that leaving had not been an overreaction but an act of tremendous courage. Julian, for his part, tried several times in those early weeks to reach her, first with apologetic messages, then with angry ones, then with a strange, unsettling calm that frightened Amelia more than his anger ever had. Carol, with the fierce protectiveness of a mother who had finally been given permission to act on years of buried instinct, helped Amelia file a restraining order, sat with her through the frightening, bureaucratic process of it, and drove 2 hours each way, twice, to make sure the paperwork was filed correctly. It was not glamorous work, and it did not photograph well the way a wedding does, but it was, in its own quiet way, one of the most important things either of them ever did together. Slowly, over the following months, I watched my best friend return to herself in pieces, the way a person returns from a long illness, a little stronger each week than the week before. She started dancing in her kitchen again, filming those loud, silly videos she used to make, and the first time she sent me one, 6 months after that day in the coat closet, I sat on my bathroom floor and cried harder than I had at any point during the wedding itself, because I recognized, in the wild, unself-conscious joy of that video, the friend I had feared I might never fully get back. She started wearing short sleeves again in the summer without a second thought. She reconnected with old friends Julian had slowly, quietly pushed out of her life over the previous year, friends who welcomed her back without judgment, understanding, in the way that only people who truly love you can understand, that she had not disappeared by choice. If any part of this story has touched something in you, if it has reminded you of your own courage, or someone else's, or made you think of a person in your life who might need to hear that leaving is not failure, that asking for help is not weakness, then I would ask you to leave a comment below telling me what this story meant to you, or sharing, if you feel comfortable, a moment in your own life when someone's kindness helped you find your way back to yourself. Our comments section has become, over time, a genuine gathering place of people supporting one another, and I read every single one of them, even when I cannot reply to all of them individually. About 1.5 years after that wedding that never happened, I sat across from Amelia at that same little Italian restaurant with the checkered tablecloths, the one where I had first asked her, over lunch, if she was okay, and where she had told me, not yet ready, that of course she was fine. This time, she reached across the table, took my hand, and told me that she had been thinking a lot lately about that morning in the coat closet, about the 12 minutes that had changed the direction of her entire life. She told me that she used to think the bravest moment of that day had been walking away from Julian, but that she had come to believe, with time and distance and the steady, patient work of healing, that the bravest moment had actually been much smaller than that. It had been the moment she opened her mouth in that cramped, blanket-filled closet and let herself say the truth out loud for the very first time, even though she did not yet know what would happen next, even though she had no guarantee that anyone would believe her or support her. Everything after that, she said, the guests, the officiant, her mother's shaking hands, my arms around her on the closet floor, all of it had only been possible because she had first found the courage to whisper 5 words to someone she trusted. She told me, too, that she had started volunteering once a month at a local support center for survivors of relationship abuse, sitting with women in the earliest, most frightening days after they finally found the strength to leave, offering them the same steady presence I had tried to offer her in that closet. She said she often told them, in her first conversation with each new woman who walked through those doors, about the 12 minutes before her wedding, not because she wanted sympathy, but because she wanted them to understand that it is never too late, not even at the very last possible moment, to choose yourself, and that no amount of money spent or invitations sent or guests seated is ever more valuable than a single human life lived in safety and truth. Carol, too, found something unexpected on the other side of that terrible, beautiful day. The 2 years of savings that had gone toward flowers and catering and a dress that now hung, quietly and without resentment, in the back of a closet, had not been wasted after all, because what that money had actually purchased, in the end, was the exact moment her daughter needed most, a room full of witnesses who chose kindness over gossip, and applause instead of judgment, when a brave woman walked away from a life that would have hurt her. Carol still works fewer hours now than she used to, though she never fully stopped working the way some mothers who have known real scarcity never quite let themselves rest, but she spends much of her free time now with her daughter, the two of them closer than they had been in years, having finally found their way past the layers of protective silence that fear had built between them. As for me, I think about that closet often, about the particular sound of a wedding dress bunching against stacked folding chairs, about the way Amelia's hand shook when she grabbed my wrist, about the 12 minutes that separated the life she almost lived from the life she actually got to build. I think about how close we came, all of us, to never knowing, to Amelia walking down that aisle with a smile fixed carefully in place while the truth stayed buried somewhere beneath her ribs, and I think about how the only thing that stood between those two outcomes was one person finally believing she was allowed to say the truth out loud, and another person choosing to listen without flinching. I do not know every person watching this story right now, but I know that some of you have stood, at some point in your life, exactly where Amelia stood that morning, torn between the life everyone expects you to want and the truth quietly screaming inside your own chest. And I know that some of you have stood, at some point, exactly where I stood, on the other side of someone else's whispered confession, uncertain of what to say, terrified of getting it wrong. If there is only one thing I could ask you to carry away from this story, it would be this: when someone finally finds the courage to whisper the truth to you, whatever that truth might be, the kindest thing you can ever do is simply stay, and simply believe them, because sometimes that alone is enough to change the entire direction of a life. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video, leave a meaningful comment sharing what this story stirred in you, share it with someone in your life who might need a reminder of hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another one of these emotional journeys we get to share together as a community. Amelia is doing beautifully now. She got a small apartment of her own last spring, painted the walls a warm, buttery yellow because she said she wanted a home that felt like sunshine even on cloudy days, and she still dances in her kitchen, loudly and without shame, and sends me the videos, and every single time I watch one, I think about 12 minutes, and a closet full of folded blankets, and the particular, sacred courage it takes for a person to whisper please, help me stop this, and I think about how grateful I am, every single day, that I was standing close enough to hear her.